Welcome to the Career Coffee Chat podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Urban, certified career strategist and executive coach, removing career roadblocks so you can achieve more impact, influence, and income. Welcome, my friends, to Career Coffee Chat. I am your host, Aaron Urban, and I'm very excited to have you join us for today's live episode. And even if you're watching the replay, I would love for you to come on in and say hi. Bring up a chair because we're going to talk about something that a lot of people either don't know how to do well, don't receive well, or not even sure what to do with it. And it's called feedback. Now, if any of you have ever seen me for maybe a minute before, you probably know a little bit about the fact that I wrote this book, Elevate Your Career. And you might even know that maybe my actual transformation point happened because of feedback. But you might be asking yourself, well, Aaron, didn't you seek that out? Weren't you looking for feedback? Well, in fact, no, I wasn't. And my friends, our purpose here today with our excellent guest is to help you understand not only how to receive feedback in a way that it may just transform your life, but also give feedback. Because a lot of us, if we're leaders or maybe peers, or looking for opportunities to help others, or maybe we just feel compelled to put ourselves out there and give that needed feedback to someone, help them grow. So if you are interested in any of this, you are in the right place. So welcome to Career Coffee Chat. Again, my name is Aaron Urban, or Coach E. Urban. You can find out more about me at coacheurban.com. And please don't forget the podcast as well, which is available on all the major channels, including my YouTube channel, which is Coach E. Urban. You can find that at YouTube, and that's you can access the live show replays as well as the podcast. And watch a podcast on your favorite channel. Please give us a thumbs up. Give us that feedback we're looking for. Give us a thumbs up, a rating, or send me a personal message. I always love to hear from those of you who are listening to the live show, whether it's live or the replay or the podcast, and what your thoughts are. Speaking of, don't be shy. Please say hi as you hop on the live show today. Share where you're from, where you're tuning in from, and what your thoughts are around feedback. Do you like it? Loathe it? Look for it? What's going on with feedback? Do you want it, but you don't ever receive the feedback you need? I hear that a lot from the professional side I coach. So, feedback can actually be your best friend. Are you skeptical? Great, because we're going to chat with our host, Glade Holman, all about how to make sure you don't miss out on one of the greatest growth gifts you'll ever receive. In fact, as I mentioned before, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for the transformative power of feedback. However, I wasn't looking for that feedback, and I sure as heck didn't appreciate it at the time. Not at all. Now let's talk about our special guest. Glade Holman is an expert in leveraging feedback as a critical tool for professional leadership development. However, as he mentioned, feedback can be delivered wrong or received poorly, and that is a huge missed opportunity. So we'll be talking about the answers to some of these questions. One, what are the skills to receive feedback more critical than giving it, which is interesting. How do you deal with poorly delivered or unfair feedback? And what does neuroscience teach us about our reaction to feedback? Now, Glade also is a leadership coach, advisor, and organizational designer. He helps others unlock and utilize feedback as a tool to drive personal growth and business success. As a managing director of Learning Bridge, he works with individuals, teams, and organizations to tap into the desire to grow, unleashing excess capacity and unlocking potential. So please join me in giving Glade a warm welcome to Career Coffee Chat show today. Hi, Glade. It's glad to have you on the show.
I'm happy to be here as well. Thank you.
I'm excited to talk about this. I mean, we were chatting before we started the show, and you know my history a little bit about feedback and why it's so meaningful to me, and why I'm so excited to have you on the show. In fact, when I was looking at your profile way before we scheduled the show, I was like, gotta have Glade on the show because this is a wonderful topic. People miss the opportunity to truly have this transform their lives. Now, we've all received feedback we didn't like. How about you, Glade?
You know, I think it's like not only receiving feedback you didn't like, but unexpected, like you mentioned. You know, everybody has an experience where the feedback took the wind out of them rather than was the wind in the sail that moved them forward.
Right.
But like I said, I chose to kind of focus more on how can you take any feedback that even would have taken the wind out, and instead redirect that wind to power your cell to kind of move you forward. Make it generative, rather than depletive when you get to receive the feedback. So I'm excited to have the conversation with you today about that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I will share with you. I mean, it's truly, I did actually write. This is one of the catalysts for the book. And it's when you're looking to write a book, you're out there, you're thinking about all these different topics, all these wonderful things you can think about. And there's actually a client of mine who said, "Hey, Aaron, why don't you write about what actually happened to you in your career pivot?" And I was like, "Oh, that's brilliant." Your best clients you actually learn from, it's not just about you giving knowledge. But anyway, so I did. And in my career pivot, literally, I mean, I don't think I can be grateful enough. It's even hard to articulate how meaningful that one moment in time was. And I was pissed off when I received the feedback too. I was furious. I was so mad. And sometimes that swift kick in the rear is actually what you need.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Glade, tell us what got you in the business of learning. You're managing partner or managing director rather at Learning Bridge. But what inspired you to do this work?
Well, about I think 25 years ago or so, when I started my career early on, I got really lucky with one of my first assignments in the consulting work that I was doing was to observe high potentials in these managed simulations. So imagine like 12, 15 people in a room for like 4 days doing business, right? That we would observe them and then give them a full day's worth of feedback following that. I did that across about 500 individuals in Indonesia, in Alabama, in New York City, in Zurich. And the start was always the exact same management simulation. The only thing different were the people. So it was a really great opportunity for me to observe behavior in a similar setting and see the difference that a person makes. Because sometimes we think that, well, what I did is what any logical, reasonable person would do as well. But I'd have these multiple experiences of all the same beginning conditions, and their experience, the only difference was them. And then my task was to give them feedback. Usually it was about a day's worth of feedback. So I got a taste for feedback and what it could do, and how do I actually help people receive it so that they could use it early in my career across those executives. A real gift for me to see those leadership behaviors. So I found its power early on for others. Now I have my own experiences with feedback too, of where, you go in thinking you're great and you ask for feedback expecting to get the pat on the back.
Right.
And instead you get here's the welcome, here's that one. And usually it doesn't take too many times if you're open to the feedback, right? Like you said, wow, that was the most important piece of feedback I've received. I rejected it initially, or I pushed back against it, or I didn't like it, but it made all the difference in the world for me, to the point where now you probably actually crave a blind spot. And so no, give me something more that I can do.
Give me some real tangible feedback.
Yeah, because what you and I learn early on is that, it's impossible to see your own behavior through your eyes. You can only see it through the eyes of others. And so if you want to change your behavior, you need to see yourself through others' eyes. And once you can do that, then you can make a choice of what to do next.
Right. So it's interesting you mentioned this. And I think I would love, if it's okay with you, to dive a little bit into that and why it's important, because you're absolutely right. We are blind to our blind spots. We can't see them. I mean, that's why they call them a blind spot.
Right.
Because let's put it this way, we develop our behaviors in this habitual way of being that's subject to cognitive drift. It distorts over time, and it may or may not be even aligned with reality or perception reality. But we think in our head, our intention is this thing, but our actions don't necessarily align with that thing. We can't see that. We don't experience it. We're the producers of that experience, but we cannot ourselves experience what we're giving out. And that's what some people call perception or presence. Like, what's your presence? We've heard of the term of executive presence, and people want to work on their executive presence. Everybody has a presence. So I'd love for people to not only think about their presence when they're actually a manager. You probably want to think about that before then. But the power of feedback is it's giving you a beautiful insight into how you're perceived by the world around you. You what are your behaviors, your actions, what you say? How is that being computed to other people? Because as I mentioned, and I'll say to anybody who stands still long enough, you can drive your credibility, but you don't determine it.
Right.
Other people do.
I love that phrase. I think one of the most helpful ways that I have at addressing that notion, because I think you identified one thing, and that is like when the feedback doesn't agree with your mental model, it's natural for us to fight against it because we want to preserve our view. And so I want to shift the mind of the receiver from that idea of defending that view of what I have in my head to say, let's discover the narrative that someone else has written about you in their head.
Mm-hmm.
And now, as human beings, right, we are story driven. We create stories and narratives. It's automatic.
Right.
I give you 3 data points about somebody, and you can't help but connect them to create a story.
Right.
And that story takes root in your head, and it's a narrative.
Mm-hmm.
So I say feedback is going to give you access into the narrative that this person has written about you in their head. And now it's not about you. It's the narrative that they wrote based on some observations and a whole lot of stuff that's them.
Exactly.
And so we're going to discover the narrative because, like you said, credibility is determined by them, not you. So let's find out what that narrative is. Once I know the narrative, I can decide, do I like it or don't I like it? If I don't like it, I can say, well, what would it take for them to make a new entry in their narrative of Glade? What would they have to see? The feedback's not so much about me. It's about them and the narrative they created. I can change. I'm not going to change who I am, but I can change what they see. And so how do I get something new in that narrative, or how do I get them to cross something out of that narrative?
Right.
And I try and move them to a space. Well, this is a point that I came in, like, seems blindingly obvious, but there are 2 things that are true about every piece of feedback you're ever going to receive in your life. 2 things are true. Number 1, that feedback you received is biased. Okay? There's no way it can't be. Yeah. It will always be biased because they're going to be reflecting their own perspective. Number 2, their feedback that they give you is going to be incomplete because no one sees the whole picture. Now, most of us think, okay, when I don't want to receive the feedback, I go to those 2 things. It's biased and they don't really know the whole picture, so I can dismiss it. Well, guess what? That's true about every piece of feedback. So stop. Don't worry.
I love this. So
I agree with you.
For those of you tuning in now or later, please let me know. I'd love to hear it. If you don't mind, pop in the chat. If you're tuning in later, watching the replay, send us a note or just comment on this live show if you're watching live show. Have you ever received feedback that you just challenged your self-image, like your sense of self? So that definition of self, when challenged, immediately pushes back because we like to be safe. We're uncertainty averse. So if we're challenged our sense of self, that makes it an uncertain situation, and our brain goes, no, I don't want to accept that. So a lot of people say, well, I'm very logical, and this is a biased piece of feedback. Well, your point that all feedback is biased is beautiful. Because it removes that as a point of contention. So our inner saboteur will tell us to ignore it, because if we do follow the feedback and follow that breadcrumb trail to uncover those golden nuggets, then that might unseat the saboteurs in our mind, those limiting beliefs that we've created, which like to live. They don't want to go away. So they'll try to keep us, reined in. But when you mention that, just keeping in mind, all feedback is biased. The point is not to just go, oh, okay, let me change, to find out what's behind that.
Well, not only what's behind it, but your point, your credibility is determined by them, not you. So if you want to find out, if it's too painful for you to think about everything behind it that could be there, that's there, and that's a valid journey too. I sometimes will say, let's just shift you to that. Let's understand that narrative from that person. Let's understand the narrative from this person. Let's understand the narrative from that person. And then now let's say, is that a narrative you want to change or not? And if it is, do you want to change it? Maybe you want to delete something or add something. What do they have to see? So I don't worry about it being right or wrong. It is there. And that narrative is what matters, because that's what's going to happen and shape where you go next, is the narrative in their head. So let's worry about that narrative. Let's find out what it is and then talk about how you want to change it. Like I worked with one individual. She's fabulous at fixing problems. If there's some place that's messed up in the organization or needs to get traction or needs to get things done, put Rhonda on it. You know what I mean? She'll make it happen. She was the fix-it person. That was all great, and it was positive. The organization loved it, but that's not the narrative she wanted to define her career going forward.
Right.
The narrative she wanted to define her career going forward is, I'm someone who can lead people to a strategic position. I can be a leader, not just a fixer.
Not just a fixer.
You know, and I can pick that. So I'm like, okay, well, Rhonda, that's great. We understand this narrative. We've got it. We've got all the data. What is it going to take for that narrative to change? You know, what would they have to see to write a new entry? And better yet, what would they have to see to maybe, because like, we can only really remember about 3 main things about somebody. So if it's not in their top 3, then it doesn't really define who you are, because they don't see the complexity. So how can I move that behavior into the top 3 impressions about who you are? How do we get that to be the dominant narrative for you?
Right. And that's your demonstrated behavior.
Yeah. And that's by them seeing you do something differently. And that's, I think, you know, one way to depersonalize the feedback is to put it in the narrative of the heads of others out there, acknowledging that it's not right, acknowledging that it's incomplete, but acknowledging that it's what drives things. And by the way, your view of yourself is also biased. And even that, you know what, it's also incomplete because you don't understand your impact on others, which is part of who you are. So it's true on both sides, and you want to kind of work with it and take it from that perspective to move it forward.
So maybe that's a window into understanding why receiving feedback's arguably more important than giving it, because we talk a lot about, we have to give feedback well, particularly leadership development or leadership training or coaching in that space. Well, as a manager or as a new emerging leader, one of the things we need to learn how to give feedback well. Yes, that's important. And it sounds like receiving feedback is also probably the most critical skill.
Well, I underline that and put an exclamation point to it. I mean, most of you, maybe those that are listening here, you've got a manager and they trained you how to give feedback and they gave you techniques, but then you think about your own experience with feedback, and like, not many of us have been really kind of gifted, wonderful, skilled, expert feedback givers. And maybe that's why they hire someone like you, Aaron, to come in who is skilled at giving it. But those aren't the people that are around you day to day. And so I can't control who gives you feedback, but I can help you take whoever gives you feedback, regardless of how inartfully or even maliciously delivered, and turn it into your benefit. I think organizations would be better served by training people how to receive rather than training them how to give, because if I can help you, I can't control all those skills around you. But if I can give you the skills to do it, then you're in control. You get to decide where to go with the feedback. You get to grow, because without the feedback, you can't grow. You need that.
That's the thing. That's a really, really important too. I would love to touch on that, because that's true. Without feedback, we cannot grow. I mean, think about how we develop as humans. We learn how to walk, we learn how to talk. Do we do that in a vacuum? No. How do we do it? Through feedback.
Yep.
That's how we do it. Sometimes it's physical feedback. I fell, that didn't work so well. Let me try to walk differently, right? Or maybe it's just, corrections from parents. No, honey, it's not, truck. It doesn't start with an F. So people think I sound like you're cussing. That was me. We had FRUCKs and not TRs. And frames. I also had frames, no trains. But it's through corrections. That's feedback. It was kind and loving feedback. It was feedback. That's how I learned how to talk. And with, my pivot point, I hated the feedback because I heard that, people don't like working with you.
Wow. And that's natural.
They think you don't care about them.
So one of the framings that I'll use when I'm speaking about this, because like I said, I think the skill to receive feedback, if I could give somebody a skill that would help them in their career, it would be the skill of receiving feedback graciously and then acting on it visibly. And that's a phrase that I come back to time and again. Why receive it graciously? So that it keeps coming. Because as soon as I push it away, whether it's false or not false, it stops coming. And then I lose insight into them. And so be open to the feedback, be gracious in receiving it, even when acknowledging it's biased and incomplete, and then act visibly on it so that everyone around you knows you're someone that can grow. Because if someone knows you can grow, and that they are willing to promote you into a new position or to broaden your responsibilities because they know you can grow. So if you have that ability to receive feedback graciously and then to act on it visibly, you become known as someone who can grow. That's the person that gets put into new, challenging, exciting
spaces. Right. And that's the person who gets promoted too.
It's the person who gets promoted. So this idea of like, I'll say early on to someone like, you're trying to hide your mistakes. Which are mistakes are basically when you figure out a mistake, that means you got some feedback, right? That it wasn't right. And there needed to be something that was changed. It's like, don't hide that's early career thinking, hiding your mistakes. Later career thinking is, no, you show what your mistake was and how you're growing from it. It's that ability to learn from mistakes that actually makes you be identified as someone who can grow. That career trajectory with stumble recovery serves you much better than a string of home runs, because everyone's just looking to see when you're going to strike out and what will happen when you do. This person that stumbled recover, I know I can put them in a new setting and they'll figure it out. So I'm going to put
so many people, and I coach high achievers. That's who I coach.
Yeah,
and high achievers, you know who you are. We don't like to fail. It needs to be perfect. And of course, can imagine. You hear that this horrible feedback that you're not considered a nice person to work with. You're too demanding, exacting. You don't care about people. Overly professional, that sort of thing. I forget the exact words, but I was so pissed. I probably couldn't remember them. And and the well-meaning advice of the person who gave this feedback to me was to take my coffee cup around in the morning to chat with people. Yeah, and my exact words were, do you want me to get my work done, or do you want me to chit-chat with people every day?
Great comeback, but not productive. Right?
Yeah, great comeback, a horrible, sarcastic, snarky comeback, but not productive. And it wasn't until the intervention of a mentor that actually this feedback took hold. So, so Glade, I'd love to, if it's okay with you, can we role play, like to help people understand how to explore that feedback that they receive?
Sure. Here's the first thing that I worry about, and it's the experience that you had, is that the feedback, because it was perceived as something that was surprising to you, and it feels like it was being done to you rather not for you to help you or whatever, you had that physical reaction to it, right? Now, we know that when you receive feedback that feels counter to what you expected, or maybe feedback that's difficult, or feedback that feels like it's about you as a person, your brain is going to react to that as if it were the same way as being physically hurt, right? The amygdala is going to get involved. It sits right there above the brainstem, and it's going to say,
emotionally hijacked.
Yeah, emotional hijack, because basically it says, I'm looking for stuff that's unfamiliar. This is unfamiliar. Well, just to be on the safe side, let me get you ready to live tomorrow. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to take the blood. I'm going to put it to your heart, to your lungs, to your limbs. I'm going to get you ready to run and fight. Guess where some of that blood comes from? It comes from the prefrontal cortex. And so now at the very time you want to reflect and learn and use your prefrontal cortex, where all that kind of great stuff can happen, it's deprived of the oxygen it needs to actually respond effectively.
Right.
So once you have been triggered like that in the moment, when you want to reflect and learn, you can't, because you just are not yourself. You're actually beside yourself, because yourself has been deprived of the energy that it needs to be reflecting and learning. And so how do we avoid that? I'll always talk about my 3 rules for feedback: get comfortable, get curious, get busy. And it's the get comfortable where many of us struggle initially, because the amygdala gets involved.
Right.
And it was designed to help us stay alive, and it was designed to act immediate threats. Guess what? That feedback about you that said you're, driving over people, running over them, steamrolling over them, or whatever, that feedback was true about you since the day you started working there, right? It hadn't killed you. It's not imminent, but your body reacts like it's imminent, and it does that immediate response. And you want to get to the spot where you can reflect and learn. So what I'll often do, we actually call it feedback jujitsu. And I say, Glade, why jujitsu? Well, we call it feedback jujitsu because jujitsu was a response to the samurai warrior in ancient Japan. Right. And it was, the samurai warrior had the best sword, the best training, the best of everything. How could you as a peasant hope to go up against them and come out on top? Well, the answer was you couldn't if you tried to meet them strength for strength. But if you learned how to take their energy that was coming towards you, roll with it, grapple with it, you could come out in a position of strength on top. And so jitsu actually means, skill or technique. The Ju part means supple. It means flexible. It means yielding. So I'm not saying feedback's a combat art, right? But I am saying if you can learn how to take whatever that energy is coming towards you, grapple with it, you can come out in a position of benefit for yourself. And so that's the first mood, is how do I avoid the amygdala getting triggered? And I think the first move that I'll talk about in that one, and I'm sure it's one you're very familiar with yourself, it's that figuring out how to make it all about grow and improve rather than measure and assess. Unfortunately, most of the feedback we receive comes to us from the framework of measure and assess. And that always implies the ability to lose something because you didn't measure up. And that's going to put the amygdala on high alert. And so if I just said, if I can get you to stop, giving feedback in the language of measure and assess, and instead give it within the language of grow and improve, that helps. But I know you're going to get most of your feedback in the framing of measure and assess. Most professional feedback comes from that frame, from outdated models that is always looking back. You become expert at just translating that into grow and improve. Because guess what? I want to grow and improve. It's human nature, right? You pick up a book, you do a hobby, you remodel your kitchen. We naturally want to grow and improve. So if I can keep things in the frame of grow and improve rather than measure and assess, I'm going to have a much better job at keeping the amygdala, tamped down and keeping the prefrontal cortex engaged and going after that more, I want to grow and improve help.
I'm glad. Can we pause really quickly?
Yeah.
Because I like where we're going with this, and you're absolutely right. Sometimes there needs to be a trained physical response to help shortcut the amygdala's emotional hijacking. Now, to be fair, as you mentioned, our prefrontal cortex, our logic brain, our thinking brain, that's taken out of the picture. It's like the shepherd's hook that comes out on the stage, the cartoons, and it takes you right out. That's what happens.
That by itself is no longer present.
So it's hard to be in the moment when that's happening. But so the first couple seconds, you can't do anything about it. You just can't.
Right.
It's just a visceral, a very deep response from a part of your brain that's trying to keep you safe. Okay.
Right.
Nothing you can do about it. After that, your prefrontal cortex might have be raising a flag going, wait a minute. So all you have to do is take a deep breath.
Yes.
Oh, I'm triggered. Mentally think I'm triggered. Take a deep breath and smile. Just take another deep breath and smile. This feedback's coming to you. And then, Glade, what would be the question?
Well, I'm just going to build on what you just said, because there is a little bit of science behind this, right? The amygdala sent the first signal that said, oh, no, this is dangerous. The prefrontal cortex gets that signal and says, the amygdala is usually right. And it sends back the signal saying, you're probably right. So then the amygdala gets triggered again. So it gets this cycle of escalation. Your recommendation of stop and take a breath is one of the ways to avoid the prefrontal cortex reigniting the amygdala.
That's right.
Because it got first bite because it was right on the top of the brainstem. It gets its first word in. It's you stopping the second word that helps, and the deep breath gives you a moment in time. And actually, if you can wait even just 90 seconds without re-triggering the amygdala, your system starts to flood with more neurotransmitters to undo the stress response. But you have to blank it out for about 90 seconds, and then it probably could take up to 20 minutes for it to actually return to the blood flow you're looking for in the prefrontal cortex.
Totally rev down. But through that, you
breathing
can buy
is the right way to start, because it's almost a remote control for controlling your brain. So, I did have a fellow who just always was a slapback, reflection. I said, every time you receive feedback, or this is even not perceived feedback, in a meeting, and you want to get your thing, he was just always a slap. It was all caps and texts, everything. I said, I just want you, the next time you want to respond, the one thing I want you to do is to stop, because he was always in attack mode because he felt he was always being attacked. Look at your watch, and I want you to watch the second hand. Take a deep breath, watch it go around once, and then watch it go around another 30 seconds. Then respond. And then recognize it might actually take time. But so I wanted to just underline what you said around that one. And because I'll get a lot of people say, I'm triggered. What do I do now? Unfortunately, you can't flip the switch quickly. But you can't help. by doing exactly what you said. But you've got to buy yourself time.
Time.
Don't respond from your lesser self. And so you got to get the prefrontal cortex back in control. One of the things that people feel like they need to do when they receive feedback that's not, quote, it's counter to what they expected or not right, is they feel they need to communicate that to the giver. They feel they want to communicate agree or disagree. You don't need to communicate that at all.
Right.
All you need to communicate is, I heard you, right? That's it. I heard you and thank you. And my biggest piece of advice for someone in that spot is don't respond from that moment. You say, thank you. Maybe I smile if I can. And I'll say, you've given me a lot to think about. I really appreciate that. I look forward to thinking about it more. Maybe we can chat tomorrow. Or can I come back to you this afternoon?
Giving yourself some time. Right.
But say thank you for it. Don't challenge it. And don't feel compelled to say, I agree or disagree. You almost, you
don't have to analyze
times where you have to communicate that.
Yeah.
It's okay. But Glade, if it's the feedback's wrong, shouldn't I correct it? No. And unless it's going to have direct impact on, quote, maybe it's a very intense conversation around my salary or something like that. No. Because as soon as I correct the feedback from that individual, maybe even if it's a subordinate, it's the last time they're going to give me feedback. And that's the last time I'm going to get insight into where they are thinking and the last time I'm going to benefit from their view. So don't communicate agreement. Just communicate received. Thank you.
Right. You don't have to analyze.
No, don't. It's just, it's your feedback. They gave it to you. Decide later.
Yeah. You don't have to judge,
it's already biased. It's already incomplete.
Yeah.
Of course it's wrong. I can, that's every piece of feedback is. There's always something I can use to explain it away. All you want to do is just say message received and then move on to get to the prefrontal cortex back in control later. Then you can have a rational, reasonable explanation about it. And remember, it's not about you. It's just as much about them as it is you.
So Glade, as far as being open and curious, but sometimes you want to explore more about the feedback, like where it's from. So you're proposing not to do that in the moment if you know you're emotionally triggered.
If you're emotionally triggered, the best thing you can do is that. Or the other thing, here's the other technique, maybe, and try this one, right? I'll try this one also if you feel triggered in the moment and you want to snap back and say, you're wrong. This is absolutely not right. Just as you're getting ready to say you're wrong, you're absolutely not right, these are the words I want to come out of your mouth. Tell me more. Say more about that. If you're beyond anything of like being able to find a way to kind of undermine their feedback, don't do that. Just ask that general of a question. Tell me more. And notice if you can do that, tell me more, try it once, then do it a second time, then do it a third time. By the third time, the demeanor of the giver is going to be very different. Because now
you can change the words too. I mean, you can change the words to, is there anything else? Yeah,
or I would actually say more about that, because it shows them you're curious about how they arrived at where they are, but I'm not challenging it. That I'm giving them my ear rather than my hand that says no, thank you.
Right.
And once someone, a lot of times, recognize that a feedback giver sometimes might not be giving you feedback; they might be sharing frustrations. And so
usually comes in the form of venting sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's why
I'm not giving you feedback, they're sharing their frustrations with you.
Anything else, like, would you like to share anything else?
Let that feedback come out until it's run out. Because as soon as you push back on the feedback, probably what's going to happen is they're going to say the same feedback again. And if you hear the same feedback again more than once, recognize that what you're telling people is no thank you. And that's why I say tell me more. Or say more about that, because it just simply shows that I'm listening to feedback.
Right.
And I can determine if it's right or wrong later, but let me listen to it first. Let them give it. Then you get to decide what it can tell me about them and myself later.
And your actions, like what actions created this feedback.
Yeah, definitely explore that. And I go down to the narrative side too. One fellow who I actually knew from way back in that group that I said I observed, who's now had a very successful career, C-suite, Fortune 500. He is a master at receiving feedback with a poker face about himself. So what does that mean? I'll see him get feedback from a group and something, and it is so off base and so naive and so out there, and he just listens intently to them and says thank you, when I know that he can dismiss it as they're immature and they're naive. And when you ask him why, he says, Glade, that's my best window into them.
Right.
Because when someone shares feedback with you, they're sharing you their beliefs, they're sharing with you their values, they're sharing with you all sorts of information. And you can take that knowledge, it increases your situational awareness, and decide what to do about them, whether it's you or not. Recognize. So he'd say, I'm learning all sorts of things about them. Why would I want to shut that down? I'm a big enough person. I can take something that looks like an attack and use it to learn.
That's fantastic. Let me know, for those of you either tuning in now or later, or listening to the podcast, have you received feedback to challenge your sense of self? And if so, what happened? Like, how did you take it? Or maybe it was feedback you're like, no, that's totally wrong. What happened with that feedback? How did you take it? What went from there? Because we all get these opportunities. It's what I call a kind of like an intervention moment, right? Now, sometimes the feedback is just a frustration and may not even be about you anyway. But as you mentioned, it's an opportunity to learn more about them as well, not just yourself. Some great relationships have evolved out of getting curious about the feedback.
I love what you just said, great relationships evolving out of that. If you want to change the dynamic, say you have an adversarial relationship you feel like with your manager, or that your manager is not an advocate for you. And my best advice for you to take that manager and change them from an adversary to an advocate is to seek feedback from them and find one teeny tiny piece that you can tell them thank you for and put into practice. Now, it may be a piece that you think they're so off base, they just haven't seen it, and I'll choose that easy one because I know they'll see it eventually, whatever. But accept a piece of feedback from them, because as soon as you take a piece of feedback from them inside of you, their interests are now aligned with you. And they'll become an advocate for you, because now they see you taking one piece of feedback on. Try that. If it's adversarial, try that. Just take one tiny, tiny piece, even if you think it's off base, and it may or may not be, and put something into place that they can see.
Maybe it's a nugget. It doesn't have to be the exact thing. It can be a related thing.
One teeny thing, but make it known that you took the feedback from them and say, thank you for that. I'm going to try, and then fall back. As soon as they see you taking a piece of their feedback, they now become your advocate and your coach, rather than your judge and critic.
You mentioned something there too, Glade, following back up with them, because don't expect them to notice. They're not going to notice. So following back up with them and making sure that they know, hey, remember the feedback you gave me? I applied this, and this is what I found. I really want to thank you again for that. And then they're like, wow. I mean, because it's really impactful. And then Laura mentions, this couldn't be more timely. Thank you. Glad to see you, Laura. Also glad to see Miss Tunzel tuning in today to the show. So again, as you tune in, let me know, like, have you ever received a piece of feedback you didn't agree with? Or maybe you're looking to give feedback better. We all could do a better job at that. So, Glade, what do you think of the sandwich method for giving feedback?
Well, I mean, if you've heard of the sandwich message, right? I most of us have, and there's other names for it. But basically, it's like, give them a piece of positive feedback, then a piece of constructive feedback,
and then follow the positive.
That's a little sandwich. It makes it more palatable. They can eat it. The problem with that model is that most of us are familiar with it. And so we're like Pavlov's dog. Someone just gave me a piece of positive feedback. What did I hear? I heard the bell ringing. What's coming next? Oh, constructive feedback. So I'm disregarding the positive feedback, and my anxiety is coming up when I hear the positive feedback, because I know there's a but coming. And so I'm already now primed to be in that amygdala fight-flight mode rather than to be a learn and grow mode. And so that's the first problem, is that people see it as a signal of something coming next, and they get that. There's also other problems with it, is that either they'll choose the message they want to, not the one you wanted. So if they want
to say that they just hear the positive at the end, I'm good.
Not that one. But I think most people actually will discount the positive and only focus on the negative. So my advice to individuals on the feedback sandwich, particularly if I'm working with someone and I want to know what's this individual's level of confidence? Where are they right now? Are they in a low confidence, a moderate confidence, or an open confidence, where they can just be open to anything? If they're down here in like this low confidence mode, the feedback sandwich is going to trigger them. And my advice to most managers is, when you've got that, separate your positive and your constructive. And what I think, and I would, what I'll call right spot, we naturally see what's wrong, right? And that's where we kind of go to see what's wrong. If I right spot with somebody, meaning I identify what just worked really well with them, and I'm doing this over a period of time, if I'm giving them positive feedback with no buts, right? No buts allowed. I want to do that several times with them. I find that naturally they'll start to ask me for the wrong spotting. If I right spot long enough, they'll ask me for the wrong spotting. And if they ask me for the wrong spotting, boy, are they more likely to actually take that.
They're more likely to receive it. Because here's a big difference. If you're looking for feedback, you're not going to go into the fight or flight mode. You're not going to get the emotional hijacking. You're embracing it. It's a completely different ballgame. So that's brilliant. Because if you continue, and this is, we kind of do a bad job. We get busy. Our lives move a million miles an hour. So we don't think to give the atta girls, the atta boys, the atta, whatever, the kudos, the thank yous, hey, you did such and such, that was really awesome, to encourage this type of behavior that we want. We don't do enough of that. We really don't. So when we are giving this positive feedback, you're right. Most people are looking to grow. I mean, most people are. Not everybody, but you're right. They won't necessarily want to just continue to receive the positive feedback. Now, there are a lot of people who absolutely just get destroyed by receiving any sort of critical feedback. So what do we do with these people? Because we know who they are. We work with them. They work for us. We know they're super sensitive because their threat level is really high. They're constantly on alert for threats. So what's going on, and particularly now that we've been through almost 3 years of pandemic and all the uncertainty and everything that's going on there, naturally most of us, our threat levels elevated. So we're starting to see more people like seeing any sort of contentious anything, in a different opinion as a threat. That's what they're attacking. So what do we do with this?
Well, I think for like you said, or I had to start before, it's when we come with that fixed mindset of measure and assess, it's natural to push away. When we come with the mindset of grow and improve, it's natural to kind of welcome it. But a really quick, easy technique for me to kind of downgrade the feedback and its impact and its, oh no, is it right or is it wrong, is to shift the focus from the past to the future, and is to focus forward on the feedback. So what do I mean by that? So quick example, on the phone, an individual had just presented to the C-suite. It didn't go well. His manager is presenting and saying like, hey, let's talk about this, figure out what's going on. Of course, he's like, he knows it doesn't go well. He was on thin ice already. He gets to say, well, the earnings call didn't go right, or it was just before lunch, or I didn't have enough time to prepare, all these things. And the manager, she's wonderful. She says, wait, Jake, stop right there. Stop. I don't care about last time so much. You're going to present to the same group in 2 weeks. Let's talk about next time. And so if you can say, look, it's feedback, it's not about last time, it's about next time. If you can move it to next time, you're putting it in the future. Where does future forecasting happen? It happens in the prefrontal cortex. Where does defensive behavior happen? It happens with the amygdala. So long as I'm talking about the past, I'm defending.
It's you're depending on that part of the brain that's going to keep you sabotaged and reined in. And
so I want just playing change. If you can make your personal home court for feedback be the future rather than the past, you're going to stay in a growth mindset. If you can stay in the future, because you're talking about next time. Where can I go next time? Not about what I lost, not about what I missed, but not if it was right, not if it was wrong. Just move it to next time.
What can be different next time?
Yeah, that is, feedback's not about last time, it's about next time. I'll say, like, get these little mantras in your head. It's not about last time, it's about next time. If you find yourself slipping, just say that over and over.
For future.
It's not last time, it's next time. It's not last time, it's next time. I'm talking about next time. Just move into the future. That helps you get out of that framing of high tense, high threat. It's about next time.
Right.
And you say, does everyone want to grow? I think they actually do when they're given the right conditions. Unfortunately, if you can't grow on your job, they find a way to grow outside their job, or they find a new job.
Yeah, and a lot of that is happening as well.
Yeah.
So Glade,
help them grow on the job.
This has just been fantastic. I think we've got a lot of gold nuggets from this. So far, from what we've heard, is receiving feedback is one of the most important things you could ever do. And then how to make sure you don't get emotionally hijacked, because if you receive feedback that's counter to your own self-image or self-definition, how to do that, either a physical interruption, like we can't control the initial response, so then we can take a deep breath and start thinking about, if you can't do anything else, just say one word or this collection of words, which is, tell me more about that, right? Tell me more. Invite the feedback so you can have time to get your frontal lobe back into play. Or say thank you very much. Don't rate, qualify, judge the feedback of any type, even it's terribly off base, unless there's obviously a critical situation happening at the time. And then say, let me get back to you. Let me think about this and get back to you. So you've heard them, all right? And then giving feedback. Don't give a sandwich. That's terrible.
Yeah.
Give feedback forward. Be future focused. It's not about this time. It's about next time. What did I miss?
I think you summarized a whole lot of stuff that I think was really good. I would say, as I usually say this, let me give you another little thought. And it has to do with curiosity. If you look at the science of curiosity, and think about yourself. If you can let curiosity drive you, you can't be angry and curious at the same time.
Huh.
It's physically, it's not possible. They counteract each other.
That's amazing.
So if you can, and so what does that mean? That's why when I say tell me more, say more about that, your own brain hears those words and says, oh, I need to be curious.
So it circumvents the anger.
It's also priming the brain for curiosity, and that will help take it down. So when I do want to, that's another, just remember, if you can demonstrate curiosity in the feedback setting, that's also another way to tamp things down, because you can't be curious and angry at the same time.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that. That's just so many gold nuggets. I'm like, ooh, we need to write another book. Glade, when are you writing a book? When are you writing that book?
Well, you're going to help me with that one. So we'll see.
Okay.
You'll help me with that one. But I would say, like I said, my wish, when I sit down with an executive, my wish for them, if the one skill I could gift them, it would be to receive feedback graciously and then act on it visibly. And that puts them in the driver's seat for their career. Don't worry if it's executive presence or for strategic thinking or whatever it is. No, that one will allow you to kind of, eat forever rather than just feed yourself for a day.
That's amazing. It's interesting you mentioned that you like executive presence, because one of my clients shared that with me, that she keeps getting this feedback from the top level C-suite. You need to work on your strategy, strategic thinking, be a strategic thinker. And she was sharing this with me. She was super frustrated, and she is a strategic thinker. So I said, well, how about asking them what their definition of a strategic thinker is? And it wasn't anything like what she was, thought it was. And honestly, I thought as well. They had this odd definition. I was like, okay, well, what actions can you take that demonstrate that you're doing this thing that aligns with their definition?
Yep.
She's like,
that's rewriting the narrative in their head.
Yeah. So we have someone who shares, Ms. Tundle shares, I've certainly gotten feedback that was incorrect, and I didn't agree with it, but I listened, acknowledged by nodding my head, and asked if I could process everything and we could discuss it the next day. Brilliant. I did not say thank you, though. That's okay. But the person was shocked and positive about me wanting to discuss later. So see, they expected you to receive it all like this. And it takes sometimes, unless somebody's just had enough, they're venting at you, which happens. Sometimes if people are actually giving you feedback, it takes a lot of energy to do that. And not many people. In fact, there's a lot of people who want to give feedback and then never will, because they don't feel like they have the tools or the knowledge, or they're not in the right place, or what have you. They'll make up 1,000 excuses not to do it.
Yeah. A quick build on that thought. I often get people say, well, Glade, I get it. I want feedback, and I just don't get enough of it. Or I ask for feedback and I get pats on the back, and I want correction. Well, why is that? Well, like you just said, part of it is we've all had an experience of giving feedback and have it not received well. It's like, ooh, I don't like that. I'm not going to do that. And maybe they'll cry. Maybe they'll get angry. Maybe it's something, so the giver is, so how can you make it as easy for the giver to give you feedback as absolutely possible? And my quick advice for you on that one is never think that they're thinking about your life as much as you are. So don't go with a general question. Go with like what you just said. Well, what do I'm trying to become a better strategic thinker. Let me give them a very narrow slice. Let me point their attention. And then rather than ask for feedback, the word feedback, ask for advice instead. Because advice puts that person in a position of wisdom, of guidance, of, so it elevates them. When you ask for feedback, it puts them in a position of judge and critic. And so if you just shift their focus from one, narrow it, and then broaden it by asking for advice, you'll get more. We do a lot of 360s through our firm, and sometimes you'll have the last question might be any additional feedback for the individual. And then you could also put at the last question, any additional advice for the individual. We get 3 times as much volume with the advice question than we do with the feedback one.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
Turn them into advisors rather than to critics.
And you're also, you're also helping them feel appreciated.
Yeah.
Right.
I put you in a position of wisdom rather than asking you to be a judge and a critic, that they might be very scared to give you feedback in that framing.
Right.
So it's another little tip that I'll give folks to say, here's a way you can elicit the feedback you need to grow. And then you get to deal with it. You get to talk about it. It's your feedback. You get to decide what to do with it. And usually I'll say, pick a teeny tiny piece of feedback from that large kind of plate, just the tiniest one, a 1% one, and let that be visible. And then do another 1% one, because extreme makeovers do not make careers. It's incremental growing that does.
Absolutely. I mean, I didn't get the leadership role within 9 months because I reinvented myself or became somebody I wasn't. I mean, that's also some pushback I get. Well, I don't want to be someone I'm not. Well, that's not the point. You're not being someone you aren't. You're not being inauthentic. I just made small and just tiny little shifts, but they were significant to the people that were interacting with me.
Tiny makes all the difference in the world. I just spent time with a senior executive, a big long report. We go through all this feedback. There's a whole bunch. What's the tiny slice we decided to do? Celebrate success with others. It's very small, something he never did, but I'll tell you, fundamentally would change the relationship. For you, it was, the feedback was, hey, you're treating us like means, not, you're treating us like means to your
positions and not people.
Yeah.
Right.
Just treat them as a just small thing. Just
small thing.
Just one small thing.
Get to know them a little bit better. Just take a few moments to be personal. And it made all the difference. They're like, who are you?
Smallest changes that make the biggest outsized impact. Don't try and change the world with the feedback. And you don't need to address every piece.
No.
You just choose one small slice to work with.
Yeah. David says, he said advice is a better approach. He really likes that. Thank you. And Ms. Tunzel, I believe, said, I'm working on this. Thank you. A lot of feedback is coming from frustration.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes that's how it happens because people just can't keep it in anymore and it just comes out. And oftentimes it's not structured. It's not necessarily positive or, it just comes out. So just let it come out. And like I tell you, it changes when they know you're receiving it. The worst thing you can do when someone's fire hosing you is to fire hose them back. Right. Just let it spill over you and come back later if you need to. And if you're giving it, I would say, first off, for yourself, if you go into a feedback experience that you're going to give someone, know yourself. Am I sharing my frustrations with them? Or am I sharing feedback that will help them grow? And if you're not going to sit down in that conversation that says, I'm here for your success, and that you don't communicate, I'm here for your success, that's the first thing in a feedback setting you want to communicate. I'm here for your success. Right.
And that is, if you can't say that, get rid of your frustration someplace else, find a way to get some empathy for this individual, then come into the feedback experience that says, I'm here for your success. Now let me have some conversations with you around what might be helpful for you that you might want to consider going forward. But if I'm not there for your success, it's there. Because if I'm just sharing frustration, it's like the person's got a bucket and they can receive about this much feedback, and then it's going to spill over the edge if I keep giving it. And if it spills over the edge, I've now got a safety hazard, because we've got water everywhere and things can really go awry. So give feedback for their benefit, not for yours. It's not just for you to get something off your chest. It's for you to help them grow and improve.
Right. Take you out of their experience equation. It's interesting you mentioned that, Glade, because more and more people are talking about leader as coach and how to have the more of coaching mindset. And in the coaching world, obviously people are like, oh, don't you give advice? I was like, well, when directly requested, yes. And most what true coaching is a transformative experience to help the individual grow through their own innate knowledge, because everybody's a whole capable human being. So being able to tap into that. But from time to time, it is an opportunity for us to share an observation, because again, to your point, people are blind to their blind spots. And when someone's speaking with me, I'll notice something and then I need to share it. That's feedback. Well, what do I say? I noticed you did the blah, 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 and that's really bad. No, of course not. May I share something with you?
Yes.
I'm asking permission.
Yep.
They need to give me permission. If I don't get the permission, no.
To hold back. Yeah.
It's not happening. May I share something with you? And then I observed. It's not a judgmental like you did or blah, blah, blah. This is what I observed. Does that resonate with you?
I like, one of the things I'll do in that same vein that you did there, you've gotten really good at observing people, I know. And you've been able to make you can make a lot of insights off of a few data points because you've been practicing at that a lot, right? But you could also be wrong, right? And sometimes I'll say, you know what? I have a pretty good hit rate, but it's not 100%. What I have here might be wrong, but I'm going to offer it in the chance that it's useful to you. You can decide if it's right or wrong. But let me tell you where I'm in here with my experience set. So I make it okay for them to place it to the side, which actually makes it more likely that they'll pick it up.
They'll pick it up. Absolutely. Sometimes they'll tell a story. I say,
and I could be wrong.
Share something with you. Like I'd like to share a story that may resonate with you, or maybe not.
I had another colleague that was like going to give a guy, a senior executive, but he was coming from another culture in a global organization. His tie and the way things weren't just like looking the part. Now, this was 10, 15 years ago. And he was going to go tell him that his tie was not appropriate for his business setting that he was working in there. And I was like, who are you to go tell that guy this? And he says, like, if not me, who will? And no one else will give it to him. So I will. Now, maybe that, feedback on a tie is not such a big deal, and it was a bigger deal back then than it is today.
Yeah, no, that's fading, fortunately. But what if somebody
I did think the idea that if not me, then who? He was showing that he was there to help the person, and recognizing that other people might not share feedback with this person, and this would help them. And I feel compelled to help, so I'm going to share the feedback. The person knew that, and like I said, you give it room to kind of be wrong. I think that really helps it be received.
Yes. And it gives the person, it's less likely to trigger their emotional hijacking. And it gives them the opportunity for themselves decide whether it resonates with them or whether it doesn't.
It's your feedback. They gave it to you.
It's been a huge pleasure. Thank you so much. We could keep talking about this all day. As you know, I'm a huge fan of feedback, obviously, because it changed my life for the better. Just one moment in time. And of course, the ensuing events from that literally transformed my whole life. And before we started the show, Glade mentioned, just think about what would have happened if that hadn't. What if that feedback hadn't been received? Like, what if it hadn't happened? And actually, that kind of scared me a little bit. Because I wouldn't be the same person. I would still potentially be a fixed-minded person. Now, hopefully not, but it'd be a completely different trajectory. Yeah. Maybe I would still be stuck in a miserable job in the middle of corporate America somewhere in a cubicle, probably totally upset because I wasn't moving up and I didn't understand because I did all the right things. I tried to be perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feedback is truly a gem. You've got to just figure out how to receive it. And don't worry if it's right or wrong. It's useful.
Absolutely. Glade, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. And you, my friends, thank all of you for joining us, whether you're joining us live for the live stream, or watching the replay, or listening to the podcast later. If you are listening to the podcast, please do take a few moments to give out there and give us a rating. And if you haven't seen or listened to the podcast, hey, check it out. It's a lot of fun. And of course, you can access this replay and all of the information from Career Coffee Chat podcast and live show on my YouTube channel. Glade, is there any way for people to reach out to you?
Sure, absolutely. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn. There's not too many Glade Holmans out there. I'm pretty easy to find. You can also be welcome to go to our website, learningbridge.com. If you want to figure out something a little bit about that feedback jujitsu, there's a little link on there for that too, or just type in learningbridge/FJJ. But I'm passionate about helping people get the feedback they need to grow, because I want them to get where they want to be.
Absolutely. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you again, Glade. For all of you, my deepest wish for you, friends, keep elevating.
Thank you for tuning in on the Career Coffee Chat podcast. It's been a pleasure. Feel free to reach out to me. My email is coacheurban@gmail.com, or tweet at coacheurban, Instagram coach.eurban, or reach out to my Facebook group, Elevate Your Career. So I'd love to learn more about you, hear your insights, and what questions you have. You can find out more about me at coacheurban.com. And don't forget, please do reach out on LinkedIn. You can find me at Erin Urban. Until next time, cheers. Here's to caffeinating your career.